Good afternoon, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Here in the studio, I have Mike Wilson. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, John. Thanks
Aiden
for having
Marietta.
me back
Welcome,
again.
Aiden.
Thank you.
And Justin George. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Today's topic is global warming, climate change, polar bears, the Green New Deal scam. Folks, do you remember Al Gore in 1996 or something like that? He was predicting that polar bears would disappear from the face of the earth. You remember that? They were all going to disappear. How's that going? Listen to this, folks. In 1960, I don't know what year Al Gore was born, probably in the 50s, I would guess. I'm not sure.
Probably.
But there were 5,000 polar bears. Guess what? Today we have over 30,000 polar bears today. Folks, polar bears are doing just fine. But everyone was like, oh my gosh, the polar bears are going to disappear. So yeah, let's go green and do all this stuff and have higher energy prices because the polar bears are going to go away. No one wants the polar bears to go away. No, the polar bears are doing just fine. It's something being sold to increase government control over your lives. It's not anything else. It's all about forcing people, to electric vehicles, for instance, if they don't want them. Electric cars are great if you want one.
Absolutely.
But you shouldn't be forced into one, and I don't think you should be subsidizing your neighbor to have one. It all goes back to, Al Gore, and based on, him going around to all these conferences and investing in all these quote-unquote green startups. But we'll get into that later with Eric Holcomb and some of the stuff he's doing.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been going on for so long now, 30 years. I'm old enough to remember back in the late 1970s, we had the blizzard years. Remember those, Mike?
Oh, I remember those very well.
1977, 78, 79. Very rough winters. And you remember the cover of Time magazine back then is about the coming ice age. It wasn't global warming. We're all going to freeze to death. And it was cold.
Very cold.
We had, in Jackson County, we had, 20-foot high snowdrifts. The roads were closed. My brother had to drive bulldozers on county roads just to open up the roads so that me and my mom could go gather eggs at some of our farms. I was 10 and 12 years old at the time, but, I was working because, you just couldn't get in to the farms because the snow was so bad. Did they say back then it was global warming? No, it was the coming ice age. It's all based on falsehoods. Remember, so Al Gore said that, the polar bears were going to disappear. And he also said, this is in capitalresearch.org is where I got this, within the decade, there will be no more snows of Kilimanjaro. He said to an audience in An Inconvenient Truth, which is his book and movie about the global warming issue. I'll call it the global warming scam.
Oh, yeah.
This occurred moments before he makes his prediction for Glacier National Park. He was trying to claim that Africa's tallest mountain, with a peak that stands higher than 19,000 feet, would no longer have measurable snow cover on or before 2016. Well, guess what? We looked into this. As of November of 2022, snowforecast.com, a website for skiers, reports that on average, 93 inches of snowfall, almost 8 feet, hits just the middle altitudes of Kilimanjaro during November and December. And 9 inches of combined snowfall is the average expected for the middle elevations for July and August, the lightest 2 months that they ever even get snow. The snowfall is right where it's always been. The upper altitudes of Kilimanjaro supposedly are getting over 171 inches of snow. And Al Gore was saying, no, there's not going to be any more snow. There's not going to be any more polar bears. Well, guess what? No, it's not. It's just not true. But we get preached by these, elitists that say you have to drive electric cars, you can't eat meat. Prince Harry, he just spoke.
No.
Prince Harry, who happens to be Jim Banks' favorite royal. And I always bring that up because Jim Banks actually bragged on Twitter about reading Prince Harry's book, Spare.
He loves to brag, doesn't he?
Yeah. Prince Harry, he says, quote unquote, "We're living through a pandemic that continues to ravage communities. Climate change is wreaking havoc on the world." No, what's wreaking havoc on the world is career politicians. Arctic experts predict final collapse of sea ice within 4 years. Again, that's Arctic experts predicted the final collapse of sea ice within 4 years. That was in 2012. That's absolutely false. The snow cap in Antarctica is actually more now. But government uses this as an excuse to control your lives. In 1992, Congress capped your shower head from using more than 2.5 gallons of water a minute just to supposedly conserve water. But the issue then is you're taking a longer shower because you're not getting enough water through your shower head. President Trump, fortunately, just did away with this just
I saw that
recently.
Yeah, I did. So I saw that.
So we'll be able to shampoo our hair again with a shorter shower, but with more water for a shorter period of time. So we'll be using less water overall. But that's just common sense. But there's little of that in Washington. These low water usage washing machines that don't really clean your clothes. Mike, I've seen this myself. I had a new washer and they do not clean clothes anymore. It's gross. The water is reused and it's not enough. And so you're really just adding soap to your dirty clothes to make them smell a little bit better. But the dirt's not getting washed away because the machines are set to where they can't use the proper amount of water, all in the name of global warming and climate change. And it's all a fraud.
John, do you have anything about Greta Thunberg?
Oh, no.
The world was going to end in 12 years. And
how dare you?
The mental health.
What year did she say that?
I think that was AOC that said it.
No,
I think it was Greta.
Greta said it too.
She did say it.
They both did, I would say.
But, just the mental health effects on people that believe that certain things.
Well, that's the problem today is young people are indoctrinated in this in schools, and it's sad because if you're young and you're out there listening, folks, the sun will rise tomorrow. Don't worry. I always say, my favorite Bible verse, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. The sun will rise. We don't have to worry about what's going on in global warming because it's false. So, but back to the point here, Biden had a climate policy that was a fraud. This is by an article by Holman W. Jenkins Jr. in the Wall Street Journal. And it was about the true cost of going all electric, to save these polar bears and to keep the snow on Kilimanjaro, which was not true. If we all switched to electricity, it's estimated the U.S. would use 25% more juice than it does now. That means more power plants erected and transmission network upgrades. Why is that? 70% of the world's cobalt supply comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. You need cobalt to make these batteries. A substantial proportion of these mines are unregulated and use children for their labor. They use child labor. They're slaves.
Yeah.
Where the metal is dug from the ground with only hand tools, and in some cases just their bare hands.
Awful conditions.
That's just awful.
We're regressing to the Middle Ages, in terms of child labor on this stuff. It's crazy. There was a study this week in the prestigious journal Science. It says that it examined 1,500 climate policies around the world and found that of all those, only 63 or 4% of them produced any emissions reductions. It's all a scam. Joe Biden's policies were not having the slightest effect on climate change, and yet somebody will still have to pay Ford $130,000 in losses per electric vehicle they made in the first quarter last year. Who's going to pay for that is you and me when I drive a Ford F-150, but it's gasoline powered. But we're having to subsidize Ford losing so much money on these electric trucks that no one wanted and no one wants. And yes, it amounts to a ludicrously costly subsidy for someone else to drive these cars. Electric cars just are not that environmentally friendly. You know, you have the battery production causing pollution. You have electricity that's not always clean. Unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, it's mostly coal that powers these electric cars, and it's mostly coal that powers the plants that produce the batteries. They may have window dressing for, solar panels on top of the roof to say, oh yeah, we're green or whatever, but it's really, when the rubber meets the road, it's really coal that powers this country. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. But back on the point, very high energy consumption in manufacturing these batteries, and the batteries have a very limited lifespan, and they are very expensive to replace. They use all these rare earth materials that use so many toxic chemicals to make them. Yeah. But the weight of the batteries is something, a lot of people don't, they are so heavy. It's 320 to 440 kilograms heavier than a normal car, than a gasoline car. So that means these cars that are so heavy are causing road damage, and they're not paying gasoline tax. You and I are paying, in Indiana, the fourth highest gas tax in the country for our roads allegedly, but the electric cars are the ones that are destroying them. Folks, we're out of time here, but when we come back, we'll get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show, here in the studio with Mike Wilson, Justin George, and Aidan Marietta. Hello again. All.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Okay, we were talking about electric cars. Bjorn Lomborg wrote this, and she says, electric cars just are another poor climate policy. Until unsubsidized, keyword unsubsidized, electric vehicles become competitive, they won't be a dominant form for personal transport. And why is that? Well, they're just not practical. They're great if you're running around town. But if you're out on the farm or you have to drive a long distance, do you want to plan your trip around a charging station? It just doesn't work. But the key is unsubsidized. Let the market decide. Let the free market decide. If electric vehicles are the path forward, the market will say that. It shouldn't be something forced on us by the government. That's where we have to have, free enterprise. Let it work. And, why is the Indiana GOP so anti-coal? Why is Indiana closing coal-powered plants in the state of Indiana? It's just causing higher energy costs. President Trump, has ordered the push for coal to power these new AI data centers. The talk in Indiana is to do it nuclear. That's fine. But there's nothing wrong with doing it with coal either. We're going to get into this later. Carbon's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. But I want to go back a little bit. Remember, Mike, we were talking about washing machines.
Yes.
This is from Humble Flow. She says, my grandpa has had the same washing machine since the 1980s. It still works. He's never had to replace it. Meanwhile, you buy a new one today, you got to replace them every 5 years. I know that's a fact right now. My dryer is going out right now, and it's, it's one of these low energy whatever things that you have to, dry the clothes 3 cycles, what used to would have taken 1. So you're using 3 times more energy to quote unquote save energy, but that's just government stupidity added.
But John, you mentioned dryers. What about, is it electric or is it gas?
It's electric.
Okay. That's another thing, that the gas, appliances are being phased out. They don't like those.
Well, they really don't want you to have any electric appliances. Long term, they want you, I guess, to have a clothesline out back again and drip dry everything and this utopia of Greta Thunberg.
Okay, well.
But it all boils down to this demonization of carbon. But I want to talk about this a little bit. Carbon emission, this is I'll explain this to you. I'm looking at a graph here. It's how carbon emissions changed since 2000. China's carbon emissions have went up 200%. India's carbon emissions have went up 105 or 155%. The United States has went down 10%, and Europe has went down 16%. Whether or not that's a laudable goal or not, China and India are exempt from it. Do you ever hear about China and India being criticized by Greta Thunberg?
No.
No.
Nope.
It's only, the evil United States, which has cut carbon, if it is bad, I don't believe it is, by 10%. Mike Lee was texting about this. He says, how should the U.S. respond if the United Nations tries to impose a carbon tax? Those are coming, folks. And we should absolutely not be participating. The UN votes on a ocean carbon tax that would spike the price of food, fuel, and everyday essentials, hitting us the hardest. They talk about tariffs cutting off trade. If you raise the cost of shipping all this stuff because of this fallacy over carbon, it's only leading to a lower standard of living for you at home. Governments expect this. They are all, the World Economic Forum, they're all just salivating to levy these shipping emissions at an upcoming World Economic Forum meeting. And it's going to boil down to the UN at that point. I say we're going to pull out of that.
You will own nothing and be happy in action.
And what, talking about, the European Union, the European Commission admits it used EU funds that were supposed to fight climate change for financing left-wing NGOs and climate organizations with the aim of silencing the voices of European conservatives in a secretive influence operation. The funds come from LIFE programs, which were supposed to provide environmental initiatives with over $9 billion in euros, instead being spent on, silencing your opponent. It's all in the name of, quote unquote, carbon sequestration. Ron DeSantis, he's fighting the Florida state legislature on this. The Florida Republican supermajority is spending time on so-called carbon sequestration, which is injecting carbon into our soil, aquifers, and even our ocean floor to lower the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. No, it's a scam. And Ron DeSantis says this, and Daniel Horowitz retweeted it. Carbon sequestration is a scam. A GOP supermajority is a terrible thing to waste. That's what's going on in the state of Florida. So that's not that different from here in Indiana. Look at all the windmills and solar farms. We'll be talking about carbon sequestration next and carbon taxes next.
Well, tying right back into Indiana here, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, the things and the grants, it's important to look into that because it's the same stuff going on here at the state level. And this is something to be looked into because it's the same nonsense that we're seeing at the federal level and with the UN forcing this nonsense on us.
Well, and I think it should be up to the consumer. It shouldn't be forced on them.
Absolutely.
Getting back to this, we talked about this many shows ago, but it's very important. I personally like the rumble of an 8-cylinder gasoline-powered car. It's unique in the world. It just sounds great. It sounds American.
It does.
And I talked about back then that Chrysler, they were going all EV for their Challengers. Their performance car. Yeah, the performance is great, but the car didn't sound like anything. I guess they could have probably put microphones in and recorded one and had
Could have put something in there.
Loudspeakers.
Exactly.
But guess what? Good news, folks. This is from Cars Illustrated magazine. Well, everyone, it sure didn't take long for Dodge to leak that the V8 power plant is coming back into their lineup. Yay. That's right. Dodge has plans to bring back the 5.7-liter, 6.4, and supercharged 6.2-liter V8s. So finally we can hear a proper V8 again.
Nice.
That'll be nice.
In a brand new Dodge Challenger. Meanwhile, the Indiana Republican Party continues to push green energy and higher gas taxes.
Green energy grift at its finest.
And what do we get out of that? We get a higher utility bill. And who wants to drive around and see all these massive windmills? And
I hate the sight of them every time I see them.
well, and
Same
look what they do to the poor birds.
Yeah.
True.
All it takes is for a bird to go under and then gone.
No, I've been out in the farm fields before underneath them, and and President Trump said this. It's like a graveyard.
Yeah.
It's not just a few birds. It's a graveyard.
It's like thousands.
Thousands. Under
Easily.
each one. And people aren't talking about that because, oh, it's green energy, it's wonderful. No.
It's like Daniel
It's
Horowitz.
not wonderful when you're killing precious birds in the name of climate change.
Exactly, and like Daniel Horowitz said, it's the green energy grift. He's talked about that, and it's we see that running through here all the time at the state levels.
Right. You know, but I want to make one more point on these electric cars. When you buy one, the battery is only good for a set amount of time. You know, it's what, 3 to 5 years, Mike? Is that about right?
Probably.
The replacement cost on just these batteries, it's not like your car battery now. These can be $5,000 to $15,000. You know, that's not just going in for an oil change
No,
or
no.
that is a major, and that's not covered by your warranty. That's not covered through insurance. That is something you're going to have to pay, and that's what's happening with a lot of these electric cars is they're driven 3 to 5 years and then they're trash.
Yeah.
And so there's a higher rate, you know, crushing these cars because after their lifespan of the battery, it's cheaper just to destroy the car and start over. So that's why they really are not environmentally friendly, because then you have to start over with an entirely new car. A gasoline car can keep going for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
You know, I regularly drive, you know, like my Ford F-150, it has 88,000 miles on it. I think I should easily make it to 200,000 miles easily.
And I love the sound of it too. It's nice.
But the electric car, no way you're going to make that. No. And so you would go through 3 electric cars in the lifespan of what I will probably keep my F-150 at. And that's driving, you know, one truck. So there's no common sense, folks. Why hasn't Antarctica warmed for over 70 years despite a rise in CO2? Scientists struggle to understand why Antarctica hasn't warmed in over 70 years. What's up with that? You know, we were supposed to say, oh everything's going to melt away and there won't be ice caps anymore. It's absolutely false. Global warming, this is from Peter Clack, global warming caused by carbon dioxide is the biggest hoax in all of modern history.
Absolutely.
It's been far hotter than today for almost the entire geological history of Earth. CO2 is at the lowest level ever recorded other than the Karoo Ice Age 360 million years ago.
Okay.
So when we come back, folks, we'll get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back in the studio with Mike Wilson. Hi, Mike. Aiden Marietta. Hey,
Hello.
and Justin George.
Hello.
So we're talking about climate and CO2. This is from Wide Awake Media. This is quoting here. More CO2 is good for the world. It is absurd to be trying to reduce CO2. Professor Emeritus of Physics at Princeton University, Dr. William Happer, says, we're in a CO2 famine right now. It's unbelievable that they've managed to turn this beneficial gas, a part of life, into a threat. Cue Greta Thunberg saying, how
dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my future! How dare you!
No, they're stealing from our pockets.
Thank you.
Yes, they are.
That's, you know, they're pickpockets. Back to Professor Emeritus of Physics at Princeton, Dr. William Happer. He says, they talk about carbon pollution. I can't imagine what they're talking about. We're made of carbon. And we breathe out, each person, each one of us in this
CO2.
on this planet, we breathe out 2 pounds of CO2 every day. And there's 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
So when they say CO2 is bad, they're really saying people are bad.
Yep.
That's what it boils down to.
And the trees love CO2. I might add that as well.
Well, so many of them say, well, people are the real problem. It's not the CO2. We've got too many people, and we really can't have more than 1 billion people in the world. There's the rub on this, folks, and this is what's, you know, why I don't like the Indiana State GOP agreeing to the premise of carbon being bad. because it's absolutely false. And if you follow through on the premise, then we're bad as humans for even being here. And it's just baloney. It's baloney. I'm using the polite term there. It's baloney.
Yes.
I want to say a harsher term, a farm term. You might guess what that is in your minds. But, and we get fed this here in Indiana by the state GOP. You know, this is from Savannah Kirsten. She wrote an opinion piece recently that was in the Indiana Business Journal. She says, Indiana has experienced a significant shift in electricity rates over the last 2 decades. Once, Indiana was amongst the lowest energy cost states in the United States. We had all these great coal-powered plants everywhere, and things were chugging along nicely. You know, I'm old enough. I remember when IU had a coal-powered plant for the steam generation on the campus in Bloomington. That wasn't that long ago. And I think they have converted to propane since.
That wouldn't surprise me, knowing it's IU.
But there was nothing wrong with the coal. And that's what this once common consumption is, that Indiana's reliance on coal is the main reason for rising electricity costs. That's baloney. It's the absolute false. It's opposite. The reason electric rates are going up is because we're building all these very expensive solar-powered plants and wind farms. You know, the wind farms are great if it was windy all the time. Solar farms are great if it's sunny all the time. But, you know, in Indiana, an Indiana winter is not always sunny and beautiful.
No.
You know, look at the one we just had. It was pretty gray and cloudy. You know, what had to make that up, folks, is coal-powered plants have to make up the energy when these other power supplies are not. They have to keep these coal-powered plants running even if they're not producing electricity.
You always have to have the backup.
You have to have the backup, but they can't just turn it off.
Something Texas
because
it
takes a long time to start up a coal-powered plant. So they just run all the time, and so now they're running the ones that are backups, and they don't. They're not producing electricity, so that we can use the wind-driven energy when it's windy.
And that's something
while the coal-powered plant's burning away.
Something that the current governor of Texas kept praising. He's like, I'm so proud of green energy. And then even during the electricity crisis they had in 2021, they didn't bother turning on the backup generators that probably had coal. He just kept praising wind energy, and really that, I think,
he had ice going into people's houses and everything. The way the water was leaking in that storm, and it was awful. And he doubled down on that too.
Well, coal costs less, and it's pure and simple. You know, for example, Kentucky still gets 60% of its electricity from coal, and they have a much lower rate of energy cost than what Indiana does. You know, there's been talk about this transition to natural gas, but the problem with natural gas is it fluctuates wildly in price.
Yeah.
You know, it's very inexpensive at times, and it's very expensive at times. Going on this article from Savannah Kirsten, she talks about this stranded costs. When coal plants are prematurely decommissioned, the ratepayers have to pay for that plant even if it's not producing electricity. So not only do you have power plants out there sitting idling, running, staying warm to produce electricity when the wind and solar, when it's not sunny or when it's not windy, so we have energy. But we also have to pay for these other plants that were shut down prematurely before the end of their economic lifespan. We have to get common sense back and not this green grift. You know, instead of hastily converting coal plants to propane, Indiana should focus on maintaining existing plants while exploring baseload energy alternatives. There's some talk in Indiana of these small modular nuclear reactors. That may be a promising solution, but the nuclear waste issue is a big deal. You know, coal is a better answer in a lot of aspects, and I don't know why. Well, I do know why. It's because in politics, these politicians, there's no money to be made on just letting the status quo exist as it is. They have to be beating the drum on scaring people.
Running on fear.
You know, this was in U.S. News. Humans may be fueling global warming by breathing.
Okay. But John, you didn't mention the cows and the methane yet either.
Oh, we're going to get into that.
Okay.
Okay. So in Britain, the Prime Minister there, Keir Starmer, He says Britain must eat less meat to hit Starmer climate target. So they are forcing you to eat less meat because cows pass gas.
Okay.
Well, it's
I thought Germany had already tried to go green.
Yeah, it didn't work out so well.
It just means higher food costs. Let them eat the bugs from the World Economic
You need
Forum.
to eat the bugs.
They've just went off the deep end. Keir Starmer will reinstate the 2030 ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in Britain. They're forcing folks in Britain to go electric. You'll have no choice.
No kidding.
Well, if you follow through the quote-unquote logic of carbon being bad, you have to ban cars and you eventually have to ban humans.
And ban cows.
That's why you ban the poor cows. It's Peter Sweden talks about this on Twitter. He says cows are now basically being fed acid in order to reduce, and I'll use the polite term, their passing of gas. There's this product called Bovar, which is made of 3-NOP, 3-NOP, which is a highly corrosive and toxic chemical. They're forcing the cows to consume this to lower their passing of gas.
That's just insane.
The poor cows, you're basically making them eat this form of acid to fight climate change. And do you think, whatever you feed the cow, it's going to get into the meat? They say it won't.
Yeah.
It's all about control. And it's rules for thee and not for me.
The elites control the shots and we don't. That's what they want.
Well, I remember this thing back in UN climate change studies where the menus are extravagant. It's all this lobster and crab and steak, Wagyu beef for them. But for us, we get acid-fed cows and less of them to eat. It all goes down to, explain why our electric bills never decrease, even though we've all switched to LED lights, Energy Star appliances, and built these massive solar and wind farms.
Good point.
Yeah.
And while China is still building coal-powered plants, they're still building 2 new coal-powered plants every week.
Every single week. And they've been doing this for how long, John?
For the last 30 years. They're still building 2 new coal-powered plants every week. New coal-powered plant projects in China have hit the highest level in 10 years, according to the Associated Press. So how does that translate to us? Well, China's still building coal-powered plants. Who's getting rich off of this?
Former Vice President Al Gore.
Yep.
Whose net worth is now estimated to be $300 million.
Unbelievable.
That's not bad.
Pretty good deal.
John, how cheap is electricity in China?
Oh,
or India or any other
it's
country?
fractional compared to what we pay here.
Okay, and Germany, for example? Do you know?
Much higher, much higher. I have a friend that lives in Great Britain. I stayed that night in their house one time. They don't even use heat in the winter because it is so expensive they can't afford it. And so, it's just, you just have to put on, 20 blankets.
Or you go out and get your electric vehicle and hope the battery's charged up on it.
Yeah.
If you can even charge the battery, if it's even efficient anymore.
That too.
Right. When we come back, we will get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Once again, this is John Rust on The John Rust Show. If you're interested in calling in, it's area code 812-497-3441. Or you can look us up on the web at rustforamerica.com, R-U-S-T-F-O-R, America.com. And we are talking about global warming. Fortunately, President Trump is, again, doing the right thing. He has just ordered the EPA to close and axe the rule that regulates CO2 and methane as pollution. President Trump is close to taking an axe, and this is from the article from Anti-Drilling Fossil Fuel Industry-Wide Issues, so they're obviously a very left-wing organization. But it says President Trump is close to taking an axe to the root of an EPA regulation that has allowed leftist environmentalists to rule the roost for the past 15 years. In 2009, the EPA adopted this major regulatory rule called the endangerment filing. The finding concluded that greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide and methane, should be highly regulated. And you know what? It took President Trump being reelected to stop this. Where has the Republican Congress been? They could have defunded this 2 years ago when the Republicans retook the House of Representatives. Where was Jim Banks?
He was funding it.
They were funding it, either directly or indirectly. They could have said no. It's all because they believe in the scam. I guess Jim Banks was too busy reading Prince Harry's book on.
Probably.
He must be a big listener of Harry and Meghan's podcast then.
Well, he was probably reading it and spending time in Virginia instead of either D.C. serving us or here in our great state of Indiana.
So Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron Houchin, listen. Why not codify this into federal law? Why have President Trump doing all these wonderful things to correct course on the quackery of this climate scam and enact it into federal law so it will not be just an easy signing of a pen by the next president who would undo it all, possibly? The Congress has not done this with one thing yet, not one. All we get from them is massive government spending. Enforced electrical vehicles. Mike, we were talking about, remember the buses, the electric vehicle buses?
I remember those. What's that?
A school district in Democrat Maine got new EV buses through the EPA's Clean School Bus program, once again funded by a Republican Congress.
Okay.
Winter came and the buses shut down during the run. They were unable to even be driven back to the school and abandoned at the side of the road.
That's very convenient.
Oh, yeah.
They sent the buses back to the manufacturer to be fixed, but they still failed inspection. And even after additional repairs to pass inspection, the buses were still unable to run.
I bet those
batteries
are the same buses that Kamala was like, raise your hand if you love a yellow school bus and giggling about.
Well, we need a Venn diagram to explain that one.
Well, it's this anti-human left-wing perspective on the world. Bill Nye, this quote-unquote science guy, who's not a scientist, suggests there should be policies that penalize people for having extra kids in the developed world. So once again, they skip over China and India, but we're not allowed to have kids here.
And
rules for us.
And this is coming from a guy who made his career off of being a children's television host in the 90s.
Well, the climate change crowd, it's really become a Jim Jones Kool-Aid drinking death cult. I know those are harsh words, but, they just don't believe in humanity. If they think humans are contributing to global warming by breathing, it's pretty obvious what, we're just going to leave the world to robots. I guess we have to get rid of the cows, humans. Maybe we can keep the chickens. I don't know.
Maybe we're about to end up in a real-life Terminator situation.
But, on these electric companies, Nikola, which was a company that made electric cars and trucks, they just declared bankruptcy. They filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy because in the end, again, people don't want to buy the cars. And if they do buy them, it's only because they're so heavily subsidized by you or me.
Reminds me of Solyndra when the Obama administration funded them and then they they ended up going bankrupt.
Well, and we have to think back to the premise. Why are we doing it? It was, it's back to the polar bears. The polar bears were going to disappear. There'd be no snow on Kilimanjaro. Both, there are exponentially more polar bears now than ever. And there's more snow than they can probably count on top of Kilimanjaro. And, the skier report is great for, I didn't even know there was a skiing up there.
It's an interesting fact.
Yeah.
But John, you were correct in going back to the premise. Is the premise correct or is it incorrect? Does it work? Does it not work?
Well, it's because they love the idea of taxing carbon. And that's what this, it's all about being able, it's just like the Indiana State Legislature, they love like this Carlo Yodel guy that wants to, or that voted to, have local counties have a local income tax. It's all about how to increase revenue for government for them. And it's the same with carbon. they're doing the same thing, but they have to fudge the numbers. Steve Malloy from Junk Science reports this. He says, ABC News chief climate correspondent Ginger Z said it's okay that NOAA adjusts temperature data because that's how you do science.
Okay.
So much for facts, right?
And Steve says this. Actually, no, that's not how science is done. You don't adjust the numbers just because you don't like them. So, folks, what he's talking about is there were a lot of studies that said, oh, there's global warming because the temperature is rising, and they just, because they were out, just adjusting the temperatures higher than what they actually were. Using models of what they thought they should be and not what they were actually reporting at, because it didn't meet their definition. Look at Greenland. Greenland's largest glacier shrank very rapidly, folks, from 1850 to 1950. But guess what?
It grew back.
It's growing today. Ice doesn't lie, but climate quote unquote scientists do. The largest glacier in Greenland is actually growing now. And China and India are producing exponentially more carbon than the world's ever known, and it's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. As Peter Clack says, there is no correlation between temperature and carbon dioxide. That's fake science. Earth's environment is powered by solar radiation anomalies, the moon and the tides, and a vast network of ocean currents, water vapor, cloud cover, the orbital variations known as the Milankovitch cycles. In life, things just work out, and we just have to trust that everything will be okay.
Absolutely.
We get fed all this baloney that things are all doom and gloom, and it's actually not.
Well, they do it to base things off of fear. I mean, what would you say? That's what I see. They try to make it off of fear, and it's not even, as you just point out, it's not even based in reality. They inflate, and as you said, they fudge the numbers, and they make it say whatever they want rather than what the reality is.
Well, and it's what Peter Clack said. The world's actually been getting colder for the last 50 million years.
Yeah.
And carbon dioxide didn't cause that because, a trace gas of only 4 molecules in 10,000 does not and cannot cause an entire world to heat up or cool down. It's the biggest con job in history. Again, I'll say that there's no correlation between temperature and CO2. This is shown in every geological study ever made. It's all false. But boy, when we start having, right here in Indiana, talking about carbon sequestration and carbon credits and trying to, promote electric cars over gasoline cars, why are they doing it? It doesn't make sense. It just shows you that these climate activists, they're not serious people. They never criticize China or India for emitting all the CO2 they do. It's always only the evil Americans. Folks, thank you so much for listening. I know this is a hot topic, and we will get back to this again someday. But I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week on the radio.